Why is every footage of Bigfoot blurry? Why is there no body ever found, yet we have so many Bigfoot sighting reports all across the country, even across continents? Why are there so many Bigfoot legends dating hundreds or thousands of years? After 23 years of chasing shadows through forests across the Pacific Northwest, after thousands of hours reviewing footage and interviewing witnesses, after experiencing things I still can't fully explain, I've come to a conclusion that would have made my younger self laugh. Bigfoot isn't an undiscovered ape. It's not some lost species hiding in the woods. I think Bigfoot might be alien. And before you close this document or roll your eyes, just hear me out, because what I'm about to tell you isn't some wild theory I cooked up sitting around a campfire. These are real experiences, real patterns, real events that don't make sense any other way. I'm not someone who jumps to crazy conclusions. I have a degree in biology. I worked as a park ranger for 8 years before I started focusing on this full time. I know how the natural world works. I know how animals behave. And what I've seen out there doesn't fit into any normal category. The thing that got me started on all this was simple frustration. We have cameras everywhere now. Trail cameras in every forest, security cameras on every building, smartphones in every pocket. Hell, we can photograph rare snow leopards in the Himalayas. We've captured giant squids in the ocean depths, creatures that live miles underwater in complete darkness. We have clear footage of almost every known animal on Earth, no matter how rare or elusive. But Bigfoot, after thousands of reported sightings, after decades of people actively searching with increasingly sophisticated equipment, we still don't have one clear, undeniable photograph. Not one. And that drove me absolutely insane for years. I used to think it was because Bigfoot didn't exist. Simple as that. Case closed. But then I started meeting the witnesses, real people, park rangers with 20 years experience, hunters who've spent their entire lives in the woods, hikers, campers, forestry workers, normal folks with nothing to gain from lying, people who were often embarrassed to even talk about what they saw. And they all saw something. They all experienced something that shook them. So if thousands of people are seeing Bigfoot, but nobody can photograph it clearly, what does that tell you? It tells you something very strange is going on. Something that doesn't fit with what we know about biology or physics or how the world is supposed to work. What I'm going to share with you are 5 things I've learned over the years, 5 patterns that keep showing up over and over. 5 reasons why I think Bigfoot might not be from Earth at all. These aren't just theories I read in a book or saw in some documentary. Each one comes from real experiences, either mine or from people I personally know and trust. People I've vetted. People I know aren't making things up or exaggerating. And when you put all 5 of these pieces together, they paint a picture that's impossible to ignore. A picture that says we're dealing with something that isn't just an undiscovered animal. We're dealing with something that challenges our entire understanding of reality. Let me tell you about something that happened about 8 years ago that really opened my eyes to how strange this all is. I was helping the Forest Service do a wildlife survey up in the Cascade Mountains. We were looking for black bear populations, documenting their numbers, tracking their movements, understanding their behavior. Standard stuff that gets done every few years. Over the course of 3 months working in that territory, we found 12 black bear carcasses. Some were old, just scattered bones and fur. Some were more recent, still decomposing. Some had died from what looked like natural causes, old age probably. Some from vehicle strikes on nearby roads. One looked like it had gotten in a nasty fight with a mountain lion and lost. The point is, bears die. And when they die, we find them. Their bodies don't just disappear into thin air. During that same survey, we found remains from all kinds of animals: deer, elk, coyotes, bobcats, raccoons, and even a couple of mountain goats that had apparently fallen off a cliff. The forest is absolutely full of dead animals. It's part of the natural cycle. Animals die, scavengers feed on them, bones get scattered around by weather and other animals. That's just how it works. We document this stuff all the time. It's part of understanding the ecosystem. But here's the thing that started bothering me more and more as I thought about it. If Bigfoot is a real biological creature, a physical ape or primate living in these mountains like everyone assumes, where are the bodies? Where are the bones? Where are the remains? We have thousands of reported sightings going back decades. Hundreds of years if you count native stories. People see these creatures all the time. If there are enough Bigfoot out there for thousands of people to encounter them over the years, there should be a substantial breeding population. We're talking hundreds of them, maybe even thousands spread across North America. You can't maintain a population with just a handful of individuals. And if there are that many living in our forests, some of them must die. That's just basic biology. Old age, disease, accidents, fights with other animals, starvation during harsh winters. Where are the bones? Where are the bodies? Where's even one single tooth or fragment of skeleton? I spent years trying to answer this question. It ate at me. I talked to other researchers, read every theory out there, considered every possibility. Some people said Bigfoot buries its dead, that they have some kind of burial ritual. Okay, maybe that's possible. But elephants bury their dead too, and we still find elephant graveyards eventually. We still find their bones scattered in certain areas. Other people said the bodies decompose too fast, or that scavengers completely destroy them before anyone can find them. But that doesn't happen with bears. It doesn't happen with deer or elk or any other large mammal. We always find something. Always. Bones last for years, decades even in the right conditions. Teeth last even longer. But from Bigfoot, nothing. Not a single verified bone fragment. Not one tooth. Not one piece of a skeleton that's been confirmed to come from an unknown primate. Then I met this woman at a research conference. She worked for the state game department, had been in wildlife management for 30 years. Real professional, published papers, the whole deal. She told me about a study she'd worked on counting mountain lion populations in Northern California. They had identified about 40 individual lions in a specific territory based on tracks, scat analysis, and trail camera footage. These were confirmed animals, not just estimates. Over the next 10 years of monitoring that population, they expected to find remains from at least a dozen of those lions based on normal mortality rates. Death is part of nature, right? Animals die, especially over a 10-year period. But they only found 7 carcasses in those 10 years, less than half what they expected based on the statistics. Now, she used this as an example of how elusive animals can be, how hard it is to find remains even when you know they're out there and you're actively looking. And I get that. I understand that argument. But here's the critical difference that she wasn't considering. They had 40 mountain lions, 40 confirmed animals. And they still found 7 bodies over 10 years. That's almost 20% of the population. So let's do the math on Bigfoot and be really conservative about it. If there are enough Bigfoot for all these thousands of sightings over the decades, let's say there are just 200 of them in the entire Pacific Northwest. That's probably way too low, but let's go with it. Over the past 50 years of serious searching, with thousands of people looking, we should have found at least 20 bodies based on that same ratio. 20 bodies minimum, probably a lot more. But we found 0. Not 7, not 3, not even 1. 0. That's when it really started to click for me. This isn't about Bigfoot being elusive or good at hiding. This is about Bigfoot being something else entirely, something that doesn't follow the normal rules. If these were flesh and blood animals, physical creatures living and dying in our forests like every other mammal, we would find remains. The statistical probability of finding 0 bodies after this much time, after this many sightings, after thousands of people actively searching for decades, is essentially impossible. It doesn't happen in nature. Every species leaves evidence of death, every single one. Unless that species isn't really part of our natural world in the way we understand it. So why wouldn't a creature leave a body behind? There's really only one explanation that makes sense to me. Maybe it's not really here in the same way we are. Maybe when a Bigfoot dies, or when it's done visiting, it goes somewhere else. Maybe it returns to wherever it came from. Maybe these things aren't native to our world at all. They're just passing through, visiting temporarily, and when they're done, they go back. And if that's true, then of course, we'd never find bodies. Because the bodies aren't here. They're wherever these things actually come from. I've looked at this from every possible angle over the years. I've tried to make the normal explanations work, tried to fit this into our understanding of biology and ecology. But they don't fit. The numbers don't work. The absence of physical remains after this much time and this many sightings and this much searching is statistically impossible for a biological creature that lives and dies in our forests. The math just doesn't work unless that creature isn't biological in the way we understand it. Unless Bigfoot is something that can exist here temporarily but doesn't fully belong to this world, doesn't leave remains behind when it's gone. That's the only explanation that makes the math work. That's the only way the absence of bodies makes any kind of sense. About 15 years ago, I was doing a solo camping trip in the Olympic National Forest. This was in late September, and I'd hiked about 8 miles in to get away from other people and set up in a remote area. I wanted to deploy some trail cameras in a spot where there had been multiple recent Bigfoot reports from hikers and a forest ranger. Nothing fancy, just a weekend trip to check things out, set up some equipment, and enjoy the solitude of being deep in the wilderness. The first night was pretty quiet and uneventful. I set up my tent in a small clearing, made dinner over my camp stove, sat by the fire reading a book by headlamp. Standard camping stuff. Around 11 o'clock, I was getting ready to turn in for the night when I heard something moving in the trees around my camp. Now, I'm very used to nighttime forest sounds at this point in my life. I've done hundreds of nights camping alone. Bears, deer, even elk walking around don't really bother me anymore. I know what they sound like, but this was different. This was big, definitely larger than a deer. And it was circling my camp deliberately, staying just outside the reach of my firelight, moving with purpose through the undergrowth. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the tree line, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. But I couldn't see anything, just darkness and the occasional branch moving, leaves rustling. I sat there by my fire for about an hour, listening to this thing move around me in the dark. My heart was pounding pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. But I also felt this strange calm come over me. Like whatever was out there wasn't aggressive or threatening, just curious about me, checking me out. Eventually, the sound stopped, just stopped completely. I waited another 30 minutes, listening hard, but there was nothing. Just the normal sounds of the forest at night. I finally crawled into my tent and tried to sleep, but I barely managed it. I was jumping at every little sound, every branch creaking in the wind. The next morning when the sun came up, I found tracks, huge tracks, easily 16 inches long, with a stride length that had to be 6 feet or more. They circled my entire camp just like I'd thought, a complete circle around where I'd been sitting. I took photos from multiple angles, made plaster casts, documented everything carefully. This was it. This was real Bigfoot evidence, fresh tracks from the night before. I was so excited I almost packed up my gear to leave right then and show people what I'd found. But I decided to stay one more night. I wanted to see if whatever made those tracks would come back. I wanted another chance to see it, maybe get it on camera this time. That second night is when things got really weird, when the experience shifted from exciting to unsettling. I was sitting by my fire again, probably around 10:30, when I noticed a light moving through the trees about 100 yards away. At first, I thought it might be another camper with a really bright flashlight or headlamp. But as I watched it, I realized the light was all wrong. It was blue-white, almost like an arc welder or one of those super bright LED spotlights. And it was moving in a very strange way. Not bouncing like someone walking. It was gliding, moving perfectly smooth and level, about 20 feet off the ground. Just gliding through the trees like it was on rails. I stood up from my fire and watched this light move through the forest. It was completely silent. No engine noise, no helicopter sound, no footsteps crunching through leaves, nothing at all. It moved between the trees like it knew exactly where it was going, never bumping into anything, never slowing down to navigate. It was like it could see through the darkness perfectly. I watched it for maybe 2 full minutes before it disappeared over a ridge to the north, just smoothly glided away and was gone. Here's where it gets interesting. About 5 minutes after that light disappeared over the ridge, I heard the same sound from the night before. Something big moving through the trees around me, circling my camp again, same pattern as before. But this time I heard something else too, a low humming sound almost below the range of human hearing. You know how you can feel bass from a speaker even if you can't really hear the notes? It was like that. A vibration in my chest, a feeling in my bones more than a sound in my ears. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I grabbed my flashlight again, and this time I actually saw it. Just for a second, but I saw it clearly. A massive figure, maybe 9 or 10 feet tall, standing between 2 trees about 50 feet from my camp. It wasn't moving at all, just standing there perfectly still, watching me. I froze with my hand on the flashlight. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds. I could see it was covered in dark hair with a face that looked almost human, but not quite. The eyes caught my light and reflected it back, like a deer's eyes do. Then it turned, very deliberately, and walked away into the darkness. Not running, not crashing through the brush, just calmly walking. And within seconds, it was completely gone. No more sounds, nothing, completely silent. I didn't sleep at all that night, not even a little bit. I sat by the fire with my back against a tree, feeding wood into the flames, watching the forest until sunrise. When morning finally came and I had enough light to see, I packed up my gear as fast as I could and hiked out. I was done. That experience shook me more than I want to admit, more than I'd been shaken by anything in my years of doing this work. But here's the thing that made it all click together. When I got back to my truck at the trailhead, I checked the footage from the trail cameras I'd set up before making camp. They had captured that strange light. 4 different cameras, 4 different angles, all showing the same blue-white light moving through the forest. But the really interesting part, the part that made my skin crawl, was the timestamp. The light appeared on all 4 cameras at exactly 10:27 p.m., and the first sounds of something moving around my camp, those started at exactly 10:32. 5 minutes later, almost like whatever was in that light had landed or been deployed or whatever you want to call it, and then 5 minutes later, it started moving through the forest toward my camp. I kept that footage to myself for a long time. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't want people thinking I was crazy or making things up. But over the years, I started hearing similar stories from other people, completely independent reports from people who'd never met each other. a hunter in Washington who saw strange lights in the sky the same night he had a Bigfoot encounter near his tree stand. A forest ranger in Oregon who reported an unusual aerial phenomenon 2 hours before finding fresh Bigfoot tracks and hearing strange howls. A camping family in Northern California who photographed weird lights above the tree line, then heard howls and wood knocks echoing through the valley all night. The pattern kept showing up over and over once I started looking for it. Strange lights, usually at night, usually in remote forest areas far from roads or civilization. And Bigfoot activity shortly after, sometimes within minutes, sometimes within hours. But the connection was there. It appeared too many times to be random coincidence. And these weren't people who were out looking for UFOs or who had any interest in alien theories. Most of them were hunters, campers, hikers, forestry workers. They just happened to see something weird in the sky and then something weird on the ground. I know how this sounds. I know people will say we're just seeing helicopters or drones or airplanes or some other normal explanation. And sure, some of these lights probably are normal aircraft. I'm not saying every light in the sky is a UFO. But I've seen helicopters at night plenty of times. I've seen search and rescue operations with spotlights. I know what those look like and how they move. What I saw that night in Olympic National Forest wasn't a helicopter. It moved wrong. It was too quiet. It was too smooth. And the timing was too perfect. That thing appeared in the sky, and then 5 minutes later, Bigfoot appeared on the ground. Like they were connected, like one thing led to the other. This is what made me start thinking about the alien connection seriously for the first time. Because if Bigfoot and UFOs are showing up in the same places at the same times repeatedly, they're related somehow. They have to be. Either Bigfoot is being brought here by something in those lights, or Bigfoot itself is inside those craft, or maybe Bigfoot itself is something that travels in a way we perceive as a UFO. I don't know exactly how it works. But the connection is undeniable once you start looking at the data. These two phenomena aren't separate. They're linked. Either way, whatever the exact mechanism, it all points to the same basic conclusion. These creatures aren't just animals living in the forest, eating berries and avoiding humans. They're connected to something bigger, something that comes from somewhere else, something that uses technology or methods we don't understand to move around. They're not native to our world, they're visitors. And that changes everything about how we should be thinking about this phenomenon. I need to tell you about something that happened to someone I know personally. I'm going to call him Robert because he specifically asked me not to use his real name. He doesn't want attention. He's a logger, been working in the timber industry his whole adult life. And he's not the kind of guy who believes in anything he can't see and touch and measure. He's practical, grounded, skeptical of anything supernatural. He thought Bigfoot stories were just entertainment for tourists, something to sell t-shirts. That's what he told me multiple times, until 3 years ago when something happened that he still can't explain. Robert was doing site surveys for a logging operation in the Cascade foothills. His job was to walk through sections of forest that were being considered for harvest, and mark specific trees, identify potential hazards like widowmakers, steep slopes, areas with sensitive habitat, that kind of thing. It's solo work, which Robert preferred. He's comfortable being alone in the woods. He's been doing it for 20 years at that point. Knows the forest like the back of his hand. He was walking along a ridge line on a clear October afternoon. Visibility was perfect. He could see for probably 100 yards in every direction through the sparse pines on that ridge. No thick undergrowth up there, just open forest with good sight lines. He was making notes on his clipboard, marking tree locations on his map, when he heard a loud branch snap somewhere behind him. He turned around and saw a Bigfoot standing about 60 feet away. Just standing there in broad daylight, in the middle of the afternoon, looking directly at him. Robert described it to me in detail. He said it was about 9 feet tall, maybe a bit more, covered in dark brown or black hair that looked shaggy and thick. The face looked almost human, but not quite right, like someone had taken the human face and gorilla face and blended them together. The creature didn't move, just stood there. Robert didn't move either. They just stared at each other for what he said felt like forever. Robert told me his first thought was that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe it was an oddly shaped stump or a shadow from the trees or something. But then the Bigfoot shifted its weight from one foot to the other. It was definitely real, definitely alive, definitely looking right at him. He slowly reached for the camera in his vest pocket. He never took his eyes off the creature. His hands were shaking pretty bad, he admitted to me, but he managed to pull out the camera and raise it up. He looked down at the camera controls for just a second, maybe 2 seconds tops, to make sure it was on and ready to shoot. When he looked back up, the Bigfoot was gone, completely gone, vanished. Now Robert's first thought was that it had ducked behind a tree or dropped down behind some brush or something, some rational explanation. So he waited there, watching the spot, expecting to see movement, expecting to see it peeking around a tree or moving through the forest. Nothing, no movement at all. So he started walking very carefully toward where the creature had been standing. He was watching everything, listening for any sound. The forest floor there was covered in dry pine needles and fallen leaves. If something 9 feet tall and probably 600 or 700 pounds had run through those leaves, he would have heard it. You can't move through dry leaves silently, it's impossible. Every step crunches. But there had been total silence after he looked away, not a single sound. When he got to the spot where it had been standing, he found prints, 2 of them crystal clear in a patch of soft dirt. Big prints, maybe 17 inches long, wider than his hand. Deep impressions showing the weight of whatever made them. But here's the weird part that Robert couldn't get past. The prints just stopped. There were 2 clear footprints where the thing had been standing, and then nothing. No trail leading away in any direction, no scuff marks from it turning, no broken twigs or disturbed leaves, no tracks continuing into the forest. Just those 2 footprints, and then the creature was gone like it had never existed. Robert spent over an hour searching that entire area. He walked in expanding circles from where the prints were. He's a professional tracker. He can follow deer, elk, bear through any terrain. If that Bigfoot had run off through the forest in any direction, he would have found its trail. He would have seen disturbed ground, broken branches, displaced leaves, something. But there was absolutely nothing. The trail just ended at those 2 prints. It was like the creature had literally just stopped existing in that spot, like it had been deleted from reality. He took extensive photos of the prints, measurements with his tape measure, tried to document everything he could. Then he got out of there because he was honestly scared. And not scared of the Bigfoot attacking him or anything like that. He was scared because what he'd witnessed didn't make sense. Things don't just disappear in the real world. Physical objects don't vanish. That's not how reality works. And Robert is someone who needs things to make sense, needs logical explanations. This violated everything he understood about how the world operates. When Robert told me this story, sitting in a diner over coffee about 6 months after it happened, he was still visibly disturbed by it. This is a man who spent literally thousands of hours alone in the forest. He's had close encounters with bears, mountain lions, aggressive elk during rut. He's been in dangerous situations. But none of that bothered him the way this did, because he couldn't explain it. And for someone like Robert, someone who prides himself on being rational and practical, not being able to explain something he witnessed with his own eyes was deeply unsettling. I believed him immediately without any hesitation because I'd heard similar stories before from other reliable witnesses. A wildlife photographer in Montana who watched a Bigfoot walk behind a single tree and never come out the other side. He waited 30 minutes watching that tree, then checked behind it. Nothing there. A park ranger in Idaho who tracked a Bigfoot to the edge of a steep cliff and found fresh prints right up to the edge, but absolutely no prints leading away from the cliff or down the slope. Just tracks that ended at the cliff edge. A hunter in British Columbia who had a Bigfoot perfectly centered in his rifle scope at maybe 40 yards. He looked away for literally 1 second to wipe condensation off his lens. When he looked back through the scope, it was gone from an open meadow with nowhere to hide, just vanished in 1 second. These kinds of disappearances happen too often to be coincidence or mistakes or misperception. These are reliable people, often with extensive outdoor experience and excellent observation skills, and they're all independently reporting the same impossible thing. Bigfoot creatures that vanish instantly, not hide, not run away at superhuman speed. Vanish. 1 second they're standing there solid and physical, the next second they're not there anymore. Gone completely. And that's not how physical animals behave. That's not how anything in nature behaves. Nothing biological can do that. This was one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle for me when I was trying to understand what we're really dealing with. Because if Bigfoot can disappear like that, if it can literally vanish in the blink of an eye, that means it can do something that fundamentally breaks the laws of physics as we understand them. And if it can do that, it's not a normal creature. It's not a biological animal that evolved on this planet. It's either using technology that we don't have and can't comprehend, or it exists in a way that we don't understand at all. Either explanation points to the same basic conclusion. Bigfoot isn't from here. It comes from somewhere else, somewhere with different rules, and it can go back there whenever it wants to. It can move between our reality and wherever it comes from. That's why we can't catch them. That's why we can't photograph them clearly most of the time. That's why they always seem to be one step ahead of us, because they're not really here in the same way we are. Not completely. They're visitors who can come and go at will. They step into our world, they let themselves be seen sometimes for whatever reason, and then they step back out. They go back to wherever they actually come from, and that's why the evidence is always just slightly out of reach, why we can never quite get that definitive proof. We're not chasing an animal that lives in the forest. We're chasing something that exists between worlds, something that can move between realities in ways we can't follow or track or understand with our current science. This next part is going to sound really strange, maybe the strangest part of all this, but I need to tell you about what happens to electronics around Bigfoot, because there's a pattern here that nobody really talks about publicly, and once I started noticing it and documenting it systematically, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It's one of the most consistent and repeatable phenomena associated with these creatures. About 6 years ago, I invested pretty heavily in some serious camera equipment. We're not talking about cheap consumer trail cameras here. I bought high-end thermal imaging cameras, military surplus night vision equipment, motion sensors with adjustable sensitivity, the whole works. Cost me about $15,000 total. Money I'd saved up over years. I set up a comprehensive monitoring grid in a valley in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, where there had been multiple recent sightings and several audio recordings of possible Bigfoot vocalizations. 20 cameras total, covering about 2 square miles of prime habitat. Everything was top of the line, brand new equipment straight from the manufacturers. I tested every single piece thoroughly before installation, checking battery life, image quality, motion sensitivity. It all worked perfectly. I left everything running for 2 weeks. When I came back to collect the memory cards and check the equipment, 12 of the 20 cameras were completely dead. Not low battery, not malfunctioning, dead. They wouldn't turn on, wouldn't respond to anything, wouldn't charge when I plugged them in later. The batteries were completely and totally drained beyond recovery. And these were batteries that should have lasted at least 2 months minimum based on the manufacturer specifications and my previous field tests. But they died in 2 weeks or less. Some of them looked like they'd been running for months based on how drained they were. The other 8 cameras were still working, and I eagerly checked their footage. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Normal forest activity, deer walking by, raccoons investigating the cameras at night, a few coyotes, some interesting bird activity. Standard wildlife documentation. But then I found something very interesting on camera number 7, one of the thermal units. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. on the 5th night of recording. The camera caught what looked like a large heat signature moving through the frame from left to right. It was definitely big, much larger than a bear, probably 8 or 9 feet tall, and it was clearly walking upright on 2 legs. But the image was severely distorted, like there was massive electromagnetic interference affecting the sensor. The heat signature kept flickering and jumping around the frame, breaking up into static, reforming. And then the camera just shut off. Middle of the recording, it just stopped. When it came back on 2 hours and 13 minutes later, the battery indicator was showing 15% charge. It had been at 92% when the recording started. I sent the dead cameras back to the manufacturer for analysis, thinking maybe I'd gotten defective units or there was some kind of warranty issue. They tested everything in their lab and sent me back a very puzzling report. They said the batteries had experienced what they called anomalous discharge. The lithium cells had been drained in a pattern that wasn't consistent with normal camera usage or even with a short circuit or other electrical fault. They said it looked like the batteries had been exposed to some kind of external electromagnetic field that had forcibly extracted the charge. They couldn't explain it. They'd never seen anything like it in their testing. They sent me replacement cameras and batteries for free, probably thinking their equipment was somehow defective, even though they couldn't figure out how. But I knew it wasn't defective equipment, because I'd started hearing about this same phenomenon from other researchers. A guy in Northern California who had his entire monitoring system fail overnight. All 16 cameras dead at once. A research group in Washington who had 3 cameras positioned around a gifting area stopped working simultaneously the same night they left food offerings. Another investigator in Oregon who had a camera that worked perfectly for 8 months, then died completely the one night something large walked right past it at close range. So I started keeping extremely detailed logs of everything. Every time I went out into the field, I documented the exact condition of all my electronics before I left, and then again when I returned. Battery percentages, functionality tests, everything. I wanted hard data. And the pattern that emerged was absolutely undeniable once I had enough data points. In areas with no recent Bigfoot activity, no sightings or reports, my equipment worked exactly as expected. Batteries lasted their full rated duration, cameras functioned normally, everything was fine. But in areas with recent sightings or areas with a history of Bigfoot activity, weird things happened consistently. Batteries drained much faster than they should. Cameras malfunctioned in strange ways. Sometimes my handheld GPS would go completely haywire, showing my location jumping all over the map even though I was standing perfectly still. My cell phone would lose signal in places where I'd had full bars the week before. Compass needles would spin slowly or point in the wrong direction. Electronic equipment just didn't work right. The most dramatic example of this happened about 2 years ago. I was investigating a fresh sighting report in the Mount Hood National Forest area. A witness said he'd seen a Bigfoot near a particular trail junction, gave me very specific details and GPS coordinates. I went to that exact spot during the daytime with fresh batteries in absolutely everything. Full charge on my smartphone, my camera, my handheld GPS unit, and a portable battery pack that was showing 100%. I set up a motion-activated camera on a tree, and while I was up on a small stepladder adjusting the angle and focal point, I heard a very loud crack in the forest behind me, like a large branch breaking. I spun around on the ladder but didn't see anything through the thick undergrowth. Then I noticed my phone was acting extremely weird. The screen was flickering rapidly between different colors. Random apps were opening and closing. The whole interface was glitching out. I tried to turn it off using the power button, but it wouldn't respond to any inputs. Then it just died, completely dead. Black screen, no response. I checked my other electronics and they were all malfunctioning too. The GPS was frozen on a blank white screen showing no data. The camera was powered on but wouldn't take pictures when I pressed the shutter button. The portable battery pack indicators were going absolutely crazy, all 5 lights blinking in rapid sequence. And I felt this really weird tingling sensation all over my body, like static electricity but much stronger, and everywhere at once. Made all the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stand straight up. It was deeply unsettling on a physical level. This bizarre experience lasted for maybe 30 seconds total. Then everything stopped at once. The tingling sensation went away instantly. My electronics were still completely dead, but they stopped glitching and flickering. It was just quiet and normal again. I stood there for a full minute trying to process what had just happened, checking my body to make sure I was okay. Then I heard distinct movement in the brush, maybe 50 or 60 feet away. Something large pushing through the undergrowth, moving deliberately away from me. I couldn't see it through the thick vegetation, but I could hear it clearly. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking and snapping, the unmistakable sound of something big moving through the forest. Then, after maybe 20 seconds, complete silence again. Whatever it was had moved out of hearing range or stopped moving. When I got back to my truck at the trailhead, I plugged my phone into the car charger immediately. It took almost an hour of being plugged in before it would even turn on. When it finally booted up, the battery indicator showed absolute 0%. The GPS unit never worked properly again, no matter what I did. I tried everything, factory resets, firmware updates. It was just dead. I had to buy a replacement. The camera eventually started working again after I pulled the battery out and left it for a day, but it had completely lost all its stored settings and custom configurations. And that portable battery pack that had been fully charged, completely dead. It wouldn't hold any charge at all anymore. I tried charging it for 24 hours straight. Nothing. I had to throw it away. Whatever happened had killed it permanently. I've talked to electricians, electrical engineers, and people who work professionally with electromagnetic fields trying to understand this. They all say basically the same thing. To drain batteries that fast, to cause that kind of comprehensive interference across multiple unrelated devices, you would need an extremely powerful electromagnetic pulse. We're talking about something on the scale of military-grade equipment, the kind of thing used in electronic warfare. And whatever generated that field was right there in the forest with me, probably within 50 feet based on the timing of the sounds I heard. Something that powerful should be visible, should generate heat, should make noise. But there was nothing to see, just the effects. This is why we don't have clear photographs of Bigfoot despite everyone having cameras now. This is why trail cameras so often fail or produce blurry, distorted images. This is why thermal imaging often doesn't work right in areas where Bigfoot has been reported, because Bigfoot generates some kind of powerful electromagnetic field, either naturally as part of its biology or as a byproduct of whatever technology or method it uses to do what it does. And this field actively interferes with electronic devices. It drains batteries rapidly, it disrupts camera sensors and processors, it makes GPS units malfunction, it creates static and interference. It makes it almost impossible to document these creatures properly with modern electronic equipment, which is incredibly ironic when you think about it. We have better technology than ever before, but it doesn't help because the phenomenon itself prevents the technology from working. And here's the thing that really connects this to the alien theory in my mind. Every single credible UFO report throughout history talks about electromagnetic effects. Lights in houses flickering when UFOs pass overhead, car engines stalling and refusing to restart, radios filling with static or going completely dead, compasses spinning wildly, electronic devices malfunctioning. It's one of the most consistent patterns in UFO reports worldwide across decades. The same electromagnetic signature that shows up with UFO encounters shows up with Bigfoot encounters. They produce the same kind of interference pattern. They affect electronics in exactly the same ways. That's not a coincidence. That can't be a coincidence. That's a connection. That means Bigfoot and UFOs are related somehow, that they're using similar technology or methods or whatever you want to call it. Either Bigfoot is using technology that comes from wherever UFOs come from, or Bigfoot itself is the technology, or they're both part of the same phenomenon. Either way, it points to the same conclusion. This isn't a biological ape that evolved in our forests. This is something else. Something with capabilities that we associate with advanced technology. Something that can generate electromagnetic fields powerful enough to disable electronic equipment. There's this place in southern Washington that locals call the Dark Patch, though it's not on any official maps with that name. It's about 12 square miles of dense mixed forest in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest area, not far from Mount St. Helens. Nothing particularly special about it if you just look at a topographic map. It's national forest land, same species of trees as everywhere else around it, same general terrain, no unusual geological features marked. But if you talk to people who actually spend time in that area, hunters and hikers and forestry workers, they'll tell you it's different. Something's off about it. Something feels wrong there. And the statistics back up that feeling with hard numbers. I first heard about the Dark Patch from a fire lookout who worked summers up on a peak nearby, watching for smoke. This was maybe 7 years ago. He casually mentioned during a conversation that he got way more Bigfoot reports from that one small area than from anywhere else in his entire very large district. So I started digging into it, going through archives, talking to longtime residents, collecting historical reports. Over the past 40 years of somewhat organized documentation, there have been 73 documented Bigfoot sightings in the Dark Patch. 73 solid reports with names attached, not counting the ones where people wouldn't go on record. For comparison, the entire surrounding area, which is probably 50 times larger geographically, has had maybe 20 sightings total in that same time period. The concentration is absolutely off the charts statistically. Something about that specific area attracts sightings. But it's not just Bigfoot sightings. That same small area has an extremely high concentration of other weird reports too. Missing hikers who turn up days later, miles from where they disappeared, with absolutely no memory of how they got there or what happened during the missing time. Strange lights in the sky reported way more frequently than in surrounding areas. Unexplained sounds that don't match any known animal. A disproportionate number of compass malfunctions reported by surveyors and hikers. Even the wildlife behaves oddly there according to people who know the area well. Deer populations fluctuate wildly from year to year for no clear ecological reason. Birds seem to avoid certain specific sections. Local hunters say game animals act spooked and nervous in that area even when there's no obvious threat or predator present. I spent about 3 months intensively studying the dark patch, really trying to understand what was going on there. I went there probably 20 different times, sometimes camping overnight, sometimes just doing day trips to specific locations within the area. And I experienced things I genuinely can't explain with normal science or psychology. Time seemed to move differently there in a way I can't fully articulate. I'd think I'd been hiking for maybe 30 minutes, checking my pace and the sun position, but when I looked at my watch, it would show 2 full hours had passed, or the opposite would happen. I'd feel like I'd been sitting at my camp for hours, getting bored and restless, but my watch would show only 20 or 30 minutes had elapsed. My sense of direction was constantly off despite years of navigation experience. I'm very good with natural navigation, usually using the sun and terrain features. But in the dark patch, I got turned around and confused more times than I want to admit. I'd think I was heading north and realize I was actually going west. I'd recognize a landmark I thought I'd passed an hour ago, but had apparently circled back to somehow. One evening stands out particularly. I was setting up camp in a small clearing I'd found. It was about 7 o'clock, still plenty of daylight left. Sun was probably 2 hours from setting. I stepped into the trees at the edge of the clearing to gather some firewood for later. I was gone maybe 5 minutes. I'm absolutely certain of that. I walked maybe 100 feet, picked up some dead branches, walked back. But when I came back into the clearing carrying my armload of wood, it was almost completely dark, like the sun had set in those 5 minutes. I looked at my watch and it said 9:32. I had lost 2.5 hours. I have absolutely no memory of that time. No memory of where I was or what I was doing or what happened. 1 second I was stepping into the trees in daylight. The next second I was coming back to my campsite in darkness with firewood. And 2.5 hours had just vanished from my life. That experience freaked me out enough that I packed up my gear in the dark and hiked out that night, even though it meant hiking 8 miles on an unlit trail with just a headlamp. I didn't want to spend another minute in the dark patch. And I'm not someone who scares easily. I've spent hundreds of nights camping alone in remote wilderness. But something about losing time like that, having hours just disappear from your life with no memory, no explanation, that got to me on a really deep level. Because time doesn't work that way in normal reality. You don't just lose 2.5 hours. That's not how the world works. Your brain doesn't just skip over hours without any kind of head trauma or medical event, unless something else is happening, unless that area is somehow different from normal space, unless the fabric of reality is different there in some fundamental way. After that experience, I started actively researching other areas with unusually high concentrations of Bigfoot activity to see if there were similar patterns. And I found the same thing over and over. There's a spot in Northern California near the Oregon border that has a very similar profile. Lots of Bigfoot sightings concentrated in a small area. Lots of weird phenomena reported, lots of people experiencing time distortions and navigation problems. There's an area in the Cascade Mountains in Washington, another in British Columbia, another in the mountains of Colorado. All of these places have the same basic characteristics: dramatically elevated Bigfoot activity relative to surrounding areas. Unusual electromagnetic readings when measured with proper equipment. Reports of missing time, reports of navigation difficulties and compass malfunctions. And a consistent feeling reported by many different people that something is just off about those areas, that they feel fundamentally different somehow from normal forest. I started calling these places window areas because it felt like they were windows into something else. Places where the boundary or barrier between our normal reality and somewhere else was thinner or weaker or more permeable. And the more I researched, diving into all kinds of fringe science and theoretical physics, the more I found that this concept wasn't new at all. Other researchers, people studying UFOs and other paranormal phenomena for decades, had identified these same kinds of places all over the world. Hotspots where weird stuff happens way more often than probability would suggest. Areas where the normal rules seem to bend. And here's what really got my attention and convinced me this was a real phenomenon. These window areas aren't randomly distributed, they cluster around certain types of geographic features in ways that seem too consistent to be coincidence. Many of them are near mountains or mountain passes, especially in volcanic areas. Many are near significant bodies of water, particularly deep lakes. Many have unusual geology underlying them, like volcanic rock formations or areas with heavy mineral deposits or fault lines. It's like whatever creates these windows, whatever causes them to exist, needs certain physical conditions to form or to be stable. Certain characteristics of the landscape. There's a concept in theoretical physics about thin places in the fabric of space-time. Places where the membrane between dimensions or parallel realities might be stretched thin or weakened or more easily crossed. I'm not a physicist, so I can't explain all the mathematical details or the theoretical framework. But the basic idea is that space-time isn't perfectly uniform everywhere. There are variations, weak spots, places where the fabric of reality is thinner. And if that's actually true, if these thin places really exist somewhere other than just in equations and theory, then window areas make perfect sense. They're the locations where Bigfoot can most easily enter our world, where the barrier between wherever they come from and where we are is thin enough to cross, where the energy cost is lowest, where the passage is easiest or safest or most stable. That's why Bigfoot sightings cluster so heavily in these specific locations. It's not because Bigfoot lives there in the traditional sense. It's not their habitat or territory. It's because those are the easiest places for them to appear in our world, the places where they can cross over most readily. They're doorways, portals, crossing points, whatever term you want to use. Places where the barrier between wherever Bigfoot actually comes from and our physical reality is thin enough to pass through. And once they're through, once they're in our world, they can probably move around to other areas, but they come and go through these window areas because that's where the doors are. And this explains so much that never made sense before. It explains why Bigfoot sightings don't follow normal animal behavior patterns or population distribution models. It explains why we find tracks that start seemingly out of nowhere with no trail leading in, or tracks that just end with no trail leading away. It explains the connection with UFO sightings and lights in the sky. Because if these window areas are real, if they're genuine places where the dimensional membrane or barrier is thin enough to cross, then anything from the other side could potentially come through. UFOs, Bigfoot, other phenomena we don't even have names for yet. They're all using the same crossing points, the same doors between worlds. I've been back to the dark patch several times since that experience with the missing time. Always during daylight hours now, never staying past afternoon, never camping overnight there again. And every single time I go there, I feel it. That sense of wrongness, of something being off about the place. Like the air is thicker somehow, or time moves at a slightly different speed, or the laws of physics work just a little bit differently. It's subtle enough that you might not notice if you weren't paying attention, but it's there, it's real, and I'm definitely not the only one who feels it. Everyone I've talked to who spent any significant time in these window areas describes the same basic sensation. Something is fundamentally different there. Something about the nature of reality itself is not quite right, not quite normal. This was the final piece that made everything click together for me, that made the whole picture finally make sense. The window areas tie it all together into one coherent explanation. They explain why Bigfoot appears and disappears so mysteriously, why electronics malfunction so consistently, why we see lights in the sky at the same time and place we see Bigfoot on the ground. Because these areas are crossroads between realities, places where our world physically touches something else, somewhere else, and Bigfoot uses them to come and go, to cross between wherever they actually live and our physical reality. So let me put all of these pieces together for you. Let me show you how they fit into one coherent picture that actually makes sense. Bigfoot doesn't leave bodies or remains behind because Bigfoot isn't fully part of our biological reality in the normal way. When a Bigfoot dies, or when it's finished with whatever it came here to do, it returns to wherever it actually comes from. That's why we have thousands upon thousands of sightings over decades, but exactly 0 skeletal remains or confirmed physical bodies. These creatures exist in our world temporarily. They're visitors, not residents. The lights in the sky aren't random coincidence or separate phenomena. They're connected to the transportation or arrival method. Either Bigfoot is physically brought here by craft that we perceive as UFOs, or Bigfoot itself travels in a form that creates light that we interpret as a UFO. Or maybe Bigfoot is inside those craft operating them. However the exact mechanism works, the two phenomena are clearly linked. When you see unexplained lights, you very often see Bigfoot activity shortly after in that same location, because that's how they arrive in our world. The instant disappearances happen because Bigfoot has the ability to leave our physical reality at will. They don't have to run and hide like normal animals. They don't need to find cover or escape routes. They can simply step back through whatever doorway or portal or dimensional membrane they came through in the first place. 1 second, they're standing in front of you solid and physical. The next second, they're just gone, back to wherever they're from, because they exist in multiple places or states simultaneously, or they can move between different realities or dimensions in ways our physics doesn't account for and can't explain. The electromagnetic effects are a signature or byproduct of their presence in our world. Whatever technology or biological mechanism or exotic physics allows Bigfoot to do what it does, to cross between realities and move between worlds, it generates powerful electromagnetic interference as a side effect. That's why cameras fail or malfunction. That's why batteries drain impossibly fast. That's why we can't get clear photographic documentation even with modern digital equipment. The very nature of these creatures, their fundamental way of existing, actively prevents us from documenting them with electronic devices. And the window areas are the specific geographic locations where the crossing between worlds is easiest or most stable. Places where whatever barrier separates our reality from wherever Bigfoot comes from is naturally thinner or weaker. That's why Bigfoot activity clusters so dramatically in these specific spots. That's why other anomalous phenomena happen there too. These areas are literal doorways or portals, crossing points between dimensions or realities, and Bigfoot uses them to enter and exit our world. When you put all 5 of these pieces together, you get a complete and coherent picture that actually explains the evidence. Bigfoot is an interdimensional visitor or traveler. Maybe they're extraterrestrial in the traditional sense, physical beings from another planet who use technology to cross vast distances and who have learned how to move between dimensions. Maybe they're from a parallel dimension entirely, a reality that exists alongside ours but normally doesn't interact with it. Maybe they're something even stranger, something we don't have adequate vocabulary or concepts for yet. But whatever the exact origin, they're clearly not animals in any normal sense. They're not apes, they're not some undiscovered primate species hiding in our forests eating berries. There's something far stranger and more challenging to our worldview than that. And this explains literally everything that has baffled researchers and investigators for decades. It explains the complete absence of bodies or bones. It explains the consistently blurry or unclear photographs. It explains the tracks that mysteriously start or stop with no trail. It explains the missing time experiences. It explains the electromagnetic anomalies and equipment failures. It explains the UFO connections and sightings. It explains why they seem almost intelligent in how they avoid cameras and humans. All of it makes perfect sense if Bigfoot is extraterrestrial or interdimensional rather than biological in the conventional sense. I know some people reading this will think I've completely lost my mind, that I've gone too far down the rabbit hole, that I'm connecting dots that aren't really there, seeing patterns in random noise. And maybe you're right. Maybe I am wrong about all of this. Maybe all these experiences and observations have rational explanations that don't involve aliens or parallel dimensions or exotic physics. Maybe, but I don't think so. I really don't. I've spent 23 years actively working on this mystery. I've personally interviewed over 400 witnesses. I've spent literally thousands of hours in forests where Bigfoot has been reported. I've experienced things firsthand that I cannot explain with conventional science. And I've looked at every possible conventional explanation with an honestly skeptical and critical eye. I've tried hard to make the normal biology work, to fit this into what we know about evolution and ecology. I've tried to make the physics work with known natural phenomena, and they simply don't work. The conventional explanations don't fit the actual evidence we have. The pieces don't fit together that way. The only explanation I've found that actually fits all the data, that accounts for all the strange patterns and impossible occurrences, is that Bigfoot is something from somewhere else. Something that can visit our world but doesn't truly belong to it. Something that exists in a way we're only beginning to understand through cutting-edge theoretical physics. And you know what? That's actually more exciting and profound than simply finding an undiscovered ape species. Because if Bigfoot really is extraterrestrial or interdimensional, if these creatures really are visitors from somewhere beyond our normal reality, then that means our universe is vastly bigger and stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. It means there are other realities out there, other dimensions of existence, other forms of consciousness and being that we're only now starting to glimpse. The implications are absolutely staggering when you really think about them. Bigfoot is real. I'm utterly convinced of that after everything I've seen and experienced. Too many credible people have encountered them. Too many independent witnesses have reported remarkably consistent details. The evidence is there if you look for it with an open mind. But Bigfoot isn't what we thought it was. It's not an animal hiding in the forest. It's not a missing evolutionary link. It's something far more interesting and far more challenging to our understanding of reality itself. Bigfoot might be alien. And if I'm right about that, if these creatures really are visitors from somewhere else, then everything changes. Our place in the universe changes. Our understanding of what's possible changes. The entire framework of reality as we understand it has to shift and expand. And that's absolutely worth pursuing, worth dedicating your life to understanding, regardless of what anyone else thinks. What do you think? Would love to hear your thoughts about this. For more interesting stories, check this out.